This is how I learned to read tarot as a dyslexic neurodivergent. Now, bearing in mind, at the time I started to learn, I didn't know I was on the spectrum. I knew I was dyslexic because my schoolwork was appalling. You really want to save this if you're trying to learn and are struggling. It isn't specific just to people on the spectrum. If anything, I'm hoping the way I break this down will really help. Put it on ×2 if you wish. I would, especially if I knew it was a bit of a longer video. And of course, you can join me if you want more content like this. Going back to 1990s, I had a fascination with tarot. That's the only way I could put it. And it was born out of hanging out with my neighbour Nancy, who lived at number 13. I always enjoyed spending time with old people rather than young. I think I've always been a bit of an old soul, and because I have aphantasia, playing with imaginary play is just not something I was ever able to do, and the kids always thought it was weird. They really didn't know how to interact with people well. I used to like Lego because I used to be able to put it together and I was in control of it and I could break it apart and put it back together, etc. Nancy and I would hang out in her conservatory and she would give me an unlimited amount of Murray mints and lemonade. She would read my tea leaves, she would read tarot for me, and she decided, even though I was really young, that she would start to teach me how to read. The issue that I had, although I found it extremely fascinating, I couldn't understand what she was saying. And I think the problem that there was nothing that I could see physically in order to understand why she drew her conclusions. She didn't use a book that you would normally get with the cards. She was using her interpretations based on what she was taught and what the person who taught her was taught by somebody else. And actually, when I think about it, she used to use the archetypal meanings, which I now understand is not the way the tarot works. I kind of gave up there. I still spent time with her, but we moved away from the tarot. And I went to the public library and I said to the librarian, please tell me there's some books in here that I can look at. There was 2 in the whole library. And when I tell you that I used to just look at the book and stare, I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't understand why I needed to learn about the origins of tarot and the influences with it and where it come from and the significance of how it travelled from one place to another and all of the different elements and systems to be used. I just wanted to get to the nitty gritty. I wanted to see what I could connect to and get these awesome answers. The problem was, even when I was reading the card meanings, it didn't make sense, because I was thinking to myself, if this is what this card means, how would that answer that question if I asked a yes/no question? I was like, oh, that doesn't make sense. Then if I think back to Mr. Alexander in my final years at school, so my last 2 years, he was my chemistry teacher. He looked like Where's Wally, and I absolutely adored him. He just got me. He was just as quirky as me. And he pulled me to one side one day and he said, I'm going to offer you 2 things. He said, I want you to represent your year in school at the chemistry competition at the university. I was like, why on earth would you choose me? I am not the person. If you're asking me to memorize things, remember every element on the periodic table, etc., I'm not going to remember. And I still remember my question, by the way. I was asked, name a form of separation, and I said distillation. And I was so flipping proud of myself. So proud of myself. But he said the other thing is I'm gonna teach you outside of class, and I'm gonna try and get information across to you in a way that you understand. ADHD wasn't something that was really recognised back when I was at school, and it was always related to naughty boys rather than girls. I went into those sessions with him really worried. I worried about judgment because I spent all of my time trying to find a way to fit in, and what if I couldn't take him what he was saying? What if I would let him down by having that faith in us? But actually, what I come to understand is, if there was something I enjoyed doing, and he made chemistry enjoyable, he made it fun, and he would show me things in different ways. However, put me in studying for my French, not a chance. Hated it. I come to learn that if there was something I was interested in, I would do everything within my power to find a way to learn it, even if initially I couldn't work it out. That is why day to day I really struggle having interactions with people. If we're talking about something I don't understand, I find it really uncomfortable asking somebody to rephrase a question, and I get rather embarrassed when my attention can't be held and I don't have a clue what people are talking about. And most of the time I zone out anyways. It makes things really uncomfortable. I decided to take the things that I'd learned from Mr. Alexander and find a way to make it apply to reading tarot. Already figured out the books weren't good. And by the way, you're probably looking at this video going, how can you have all those books in the background yet say books don't work? So my tip is this. Nowadays, we have access to so much information. I listen to audiobooks on repeat, and I use different apps, ones where you can have multiple downloads a month and one where you can keep them forever. And I would choose the ones where the person and how they were describing things in the book made sense to me, and also I like the sound of the author. And then I would listen to them on repeat over and over and over. Then I'd buy the book, and then I would highlight in the book the bits that were interesting that I understood. If I couldn't get an audiobook, and still this is the case, I would buy a book, take the bits that are of interest to me, copy it, airdrop it to my computer, put it into Word, and ask Word to basically read out the information to us. And then I could see whether or not I could understand it. Long and convoluted, yes, but it helps me. Going back to working out how best to do this, I decided to approach this differently and say, in these cards, instead of studying everything and trying to work out what it all means, I'm going to look at it and say, what do I see? I noticed that all the cards had numbers. Then I questioned why, and do the numbers mean anything? Because the numbers wouldn't be there if they weren't relevant, right? And then I asked myself the question, well, why is all these colours in here? And why does there seem to be a collection of the same repeating colours? And why is yellow in this card, but it's blue in that card, or green, or whatever the case may be? That become the next focus. And I continued doing that, looking at the people in the cards, how they face each other, how they interact with the cards around them, etc., etc. And then I journaled all of this, and then I started a process, like a system, like a flow chart, if you want to put it that, a flow chart that made sense to me. Now, the irony is that, and by the way, I'm not reinventing something that isn't already a concept that other people use. It was just how I took in that information. Now, frustratingly, there's lots of books that show a process similar to mine. Not in the same order, of course, because again, everyone takes in information differently, and somebody else's understanding of it might be different to my understanding of it. But then again, when I think about it, books that I think is very similar, I probably wouldn't read them anyways. Anyway, following that system, I then started reading and asking questions, and I was still asking myself, but I get why these are important, and it's opening my mind up to things, but it's still not necessarily answering the question because I'm asking closed questions, yes, no answers. Then I thought to myself, well, I spend all my time when I'm interacting with people thinking I need to ask this person to rephrase the question because I don't understand what they were saying. And I thought, well, I might feel uncomfortable doing that in that situation, but there's no reason why I can't rephrase the questions within the cards. And I started to learn about the importance of open questions. Once I start applying them, it's like the light bulb went off, and I started to understand how the cards were meant to be interacted with. And then at that point, I obsessively worked on learning something every day in the ways that I'd come to realize worked. Not always, it's not a perfect formula, but that really helped. What I would say is, when you're learning it, instead of looking at the card in its entirety, break down all the information. And I want you to remember as well that the Fool's Journey is a metaphor, and it's merely used to represent where the Fool is on his journey and things he needs to consider. The meanings of those archetypes do not answer your question. And I think if only people understood that, it would completely change their ideals or ideas of how it reads. The cards are not meant Empress. If you were asking a question about career, the Empress wouldn't show up to say that you were going to get pregnant or somebody in your office was going to get pregnant. The Empress would be expressing some information to us based on the question we asked and based on the cards around it. And Even though being neurodivergent, I can hyperfocus and I can spend days where I'm not really sleeping or eating, learning more stuff about the tarot. But I think the reason why I have not ever lost interest in this is because it's like an obsession. You see people who like to know different makes and models of stuff, collect stuff and that type of thing. And for me, it's this, and it works. I'm able to do this and interact with people and coming from a place of understanding, because pretty much had every question asked in every scenario, and because I'm confident I can convey that. And of course, because I understand all the inner workings of something, it's a bit like, I use this analogy a lot, somebody asked me to change a filter on a car, I couldn't. The reason I couldn't is because I'd have to understand how the whole engine worked in order to be able to even consider at some point being able to change the filter, because it won't make sense. The other one is my boss once said to me, why is it if I tell you 2 + 2 is 5, can you not just accept my answer? I'd go, because it isn't, and I'd need to understand why you believe that is the case. And if I didn't know the answer, I would still say, you need to explain to me why, otherwise I'm not going to go around saying that, because I wouldn't be able to place it in a sentence if I didn't understand it. I hope that makes sense. But listen, all I would say to people is there are means in which you can learn, and they really can be simplified. I think it's a shame that there is a widely accepted oversimplification, easy for me to say, of what the cards mean, and that is a travesty, which is why I do videos very passionately saying this is not how to do it. I've done recent videos where I've shown how I conduct a reading. I've chosen very basic ones where I've not gone into nitty-gritty where it's personal to people, but I'm very conversational. I'm always trying to gain an understanding of why somebody comes to me and what questions they ask, and that is for them and me, so I can make sure that before I go into a reading I understand what the person wants by asking lots of questions, and then I can pose the question in a way that my brain will be able to compute the information. There you go. Chunk everything down, ask lots of questions, look at why there are so many elements in the card that have been put there, and they've all been put there for a reason. Think about it like that. A meaning of a card does not explain why there's a horse in one card and why there's more yellow and blue in the entire deck than there is anything else, closely followed by red, grey. All matters. It all matters. Thanks for staying with me. I hope it was helpful. And if you want to drop in the comments if there's any other questions that you might have. But thanks for staying with me this long. Lots of love.